Well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good day, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Thank you for being here and thank you for watching the recording. Today, I am delighted to welcome you to MagnifEssence in Motion. This is episode number 9, and my title today is The Mystery of Fear. Well, I'm sure we all know what fear is. Everyone's experienced it. It's the silent companion that walks beside us through every decision, every risk, and every moment of uncertainty. It can grip us in the dead of night, whispering worst-case scenarios, paralyzing us with doubts. Yet, fear is not really an enemy. It's a teacher. It sharpens our instincts, it heightens our senses, and it forces us to confront the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. But when does fear protect us, and when does it hold us back? What happens when the very thing meant to keep us safe becomes the chain that binds us to stagnation? So in this episode of MagnifEssence in Motion, Reiki Master Scott Holmes joins me, and we're going to unravel the tangled web of fear, its origins, its purpose, and how we can transform it from a crippling force into a catalyst for growth. So please join me in welcoming my delightful and very, very smiley friend, Scott Holmes. Welcome, Scott. Good to see you again.
Smiley friend. I like that.
Yeah.
When you propose a subject, I really kind of came into it because there are so many levels to this discussion. So, for instance, I just got back from Hawaii and I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt, and there's a certain level of fear of that, and not being professional on camera, and not being what is thought of as what you should be wearing, right? Should I be wearing a coat and tie? What should I be wearing? And there's that fear, little bit of fear in that about, will I be accepted? Is it acceptable to wear a very brightly ornate colored shirt or not? And it's that acceptance, and our fears, when we look at them, they have a place in us that we find lacking, I think. And that is, am I going to be accepted? Am I going to be loved? Am I going to be cared for? Am I going to be all of those? It's all of those things that we had when we were kids, going to first grade and saying, oh my gosh, will anybody like me? Will I be able to, play in the playground and not have this anticipation of being left alone or not picked on for the baseball? I don't know about you, but I was always afraid I was going to be the last one picked for kickball or whatever, and seen as not quite good enough.
Right.
So fear
what's funny about that? There's a lot of interesting perspectives on that. The first thing I want to say is, if you're getting picked last, you're still getting picked. That's something that my dad once said to me, and he says, you still got picked, didn't you? Does it matter if you got picked first or if you got picked last? And I thought about that, and I said, you're right. It doesn't make any difference. There were probably a couple of guys who didn't make the cut. So, and when they didn't make the cut, I thought, oh, what relief that is to not be the one who didn't make the cut, So, you're absolutely right. These stories go on in our minds. I think we all want to be part of something. We want to belong, We want to be accepted into our own group of friends, fellow students, fellow members of the military, whatever the group is. We want to be a part. We want to be a part of it. We've joined it for maybe one reason, but still wanting to be a part of something is pretty important. And any kind of rejection that we face that, comes about because, I don't know, we, like you say, wear the wrong kind of shirt, or maybe don't have your beard cut quite right, or, maybe you got a booger hanging out of your nose, whatever it might be. There's always some way in which somebody can criticize something about me. No matter how perfectly I turn out, there could be something that someone's going to see that they don't like, whatever. And isn't it a funny thing that we all tend to notice the flaws, the differences, the inconsistencies, rather than all of the other beautiful stuff that we see, we pick on that one tiny little thread and we pull on it. Have you ever noticed that?
Oh yeah,
And what
absolutely.
is that? Well, I think, first of all, our minds tend to have an ability to spot patterns. And so when there's a flaw in the pattern, the mind picks that up almost immediately. And this is not necessarily about the ego mind, although the ego can certainly turn that flaw into something egregious, right? But we have a natural tendency to notice patterns. And so if the pattern isn't quite right, we have a judgment about the pattern, right? And that's really a fascinating side of things to me. None of this specifically ties to the idea of fear, because if I see a pattern and there's something wrong with the pattern, I don't really necessarily have a judgment about it other than I spotted the error. But it doesn't bring up fear in me by itself. It's when the ego mind starts activating about that flaw. That's when the fear starts picking up. Is that the same for you? Have you had that experience?
Oh, absolutely. I remember growing up, and we had like 12 kids within 3 years of age in my neighborhood. And it was always pecking order, right? So to increase your level in the pecking order, you would find the flaw in other people. And some of my friends were masters at taking that one thing that really bugs the heck out of you. Maybe my nose is too long. Maybe my speech is different. Maybe, my clothes aren't the same. And they would find a way to take that and pick at it, so that you felt it. And luckily, by the way, as we grow up, hopefully we don't find that anymore, because we want to be that individual. We're going to be true to ourselves. So we just don't care what other people think, or not necessarily don't care it at all. Just, it doesn't really matter if I don't have to live with them.
That's right. And it's funny that you mentioned that, the idea that reaching a point where you don't care. I like to think that I don't care, that it doesn't matter to me what you think of me. But the truth is, it does matter. I can say, yeah, I don't really care what that person thinks of me, until I hear that person say something that kind of hurts. It's like a dart to my heart, and it hurts. And I realize, oh, I guess I do care what that person thinks. It's all fine and dandy while we're loving on each other and we're saying all kinds of positive things and supporting each other and everything. But it really kind of does hurt, doesn't it? Sometimes when somebody says something, you put a lot of time and effort into something, and somebody points to a flaw, and it's not a flaw that you necessarily see.
Right.
And it may not even be a flaw at all. It's just something that person sees, and you think, God, you say to yourself, wow, you're so picky.
And for those who have written, okay, and you think you've been through the 733rd version of what you wrote, and you say, I've seen absolutely everything that's wrong with this. I can't possibly make it better. Someone comes along and goes, nope. Okay, yeah, you really didn't say this right. It can devastate you. It can devastate you when you think you really have it. And so,
Right.
It's perspective, it's ownership, it's the way that you deal with life, and that how you deal with fear really shows in how you deal with everything in life, and
Exactly.
how you see yourself.
Yeah. One of the best lessons I learned years ago about anybody who's making a criticism or a judgment about me or about something I've done, if I can just say, you're right, and just leave it at that, then I find there's a lot less energy about it for me. Now I can go and look at the thing and say, yeah, I can see the perspective. I can see the point of view. I can see the value of that piece of feedback, even if it wasn't necessarily delivered in a soft
In the
and gentle
nicest
and
possible
compassionate way. Yeah, but not everybody behaves in that way of being. I want to tell you something, Scott, but I have no clue how to tell you, so I'm just going to blurt it out and hope it doesn't hurt your feelings. That's kind of how some people are. And it's not that they're necessarily deliberately trying to hurt us. It's they're trying to be honest and truthful, and without sugarcoating it, I guess. And the sugarcoating really doesn't work anything anyway, except to produce cavities.
Well put. Hey, we've known each other for a long time, and we've done a lot of work. And I absolutely enjoy when you turn perspectives on its head. So we were talking about fear, and I always said that, especially in raising children, a little fear goes a long way.
Right.
When you have that slight bit of fear, there's a matter of respect, because there are consequences for actions.
Right.
That's what I always found. If there aren't any consequences, and there is no fear of retribution or having to live with the things that you did, hey, I can do anything I want and not have to worry about anybody else. And that's where respect comes in, and that's where I think the learning of being kind to people. You've always said that, try to be as kind as you can to other people, so that
Right.
Because that's how you want to be dealt with. Yeah,
and I'm really good at saying that. I'm not necessarily good at doing it. It's one of those things that I work at. I I have to constantly remind myself. This is just another human being doing the best that he or she can do with whatever information and other resources that he or she has. So it really makes, maybe I have better resources available, and therefore I can achieve this much more easily than that other person can. But I still have to keep it in mind that not everybody is at the same stage. Not everybody has the same level of awareness in their life. And the problem for me is that I've always been an impatient person. And so learning to develop patience has been like the most challenging thing in my life. I just don't have the patience to become patient. But the other side of it is, there's often, you talked about flipping perspectives on their head. I do that for myself a lot. I try to think things through and say, okay, well, what if it's this other way? Or how could I approach this in a way that maybe doesn't create that kind of consequence? Can I be more careful on the choices I make and in the way I deliver something to somebody? Because one thing I have learned is, we talked about this in another program, I'm sure, and I've mentioned this before, you do this phrase, brutal honesty. I understand what people mean by it, but the fact of the matter is, sometimes honesty can be hurtful if it's delivered in a way that has no compassion associated with it. So it's possible to deliver even the most difficult truths from a place of loving kindness and compassion. It's possible to do that. And that's something that all of us can learn to do, and something that I've been working on for a long time now, since about 2003, when I really started doing this work. But I have to admit that there's sometimes my old habits creep in, and I catch myself saying something like, oh my God, I can't believe I just did that again.
Again, yeah. Welcome to the human race. So that compassion, it took me a very long, much the same way. It took me extraordinary amount of time in order to find compassion within myself and in how I dealt with people. I was always very forceful. I was very forward, maybe too brutal, brutal with the honesty. And it was always told to me that if you're compassionate, there is a weakness there. There is a fear that you aren't going to be strong enough. You were showing that you weren't all there, because you were just weak, and there was a fear in that growing up, and because in my family, much the same way, we picked on each other, and it was how we showed kind of our love language within the family. But there were times when it hit home really hard, and it stayed there. That hurt, and so I was always taught, don't show a weakness because it's going to be used against you. Right. And so there was always that fear that I did not want to show that kind of weak side of me, that poet in me, because people would use it against me. And so there was always that fear of, it'll be used against me, so I'm not going to show anybody that. And it changes to how you deal with people when you're in that frame of mind, because you don't let people in. I always wondered why aren't people coming this way? Why do they always walk away? Why do they not come? It was because I was not as welcoming as I could be.
Right. Yeah, it's a learned habit for sure. And so you've mentioned this brutal honesty. I've mentioned brutal honesty, and I have to say, to be 100% honest with people, I would love it if all feedback to me was delivered in a loving, compassionate manner. That would be great. However, I also don't want people to not give me feedback because they're afraid to give me feedback. So if the only way you can deliver it is in brutal, honest form, I'd rather have that than be given some kind of a sweet, tasty white lie about something. Right. Because I think ultimately truth is the only thing that really matters. Love and truth together, right? But they can't always be delivered at the same time and with the same kind of energy. So I'd rather have 100% whole truth, even if it's ugly and messy, than have any kind of a lie delivered to me. So I guess, we've kind of gotten a little off the topic of fear here, but I think they're definitely related. You were talking about fears before, and I remember thinking about this. I have been pretty fearless most of my life as far as physical things are concerned. I've always had this crazy idea that I'm invulnerable and I could just do stuff, and I'd try stuff, and sometimes I'd hurt myself, sometimes I wouldn't, but physically the fear didn't slow me down as much. However, emotionally and mentally, man, oh man, that's where fear really, really got me. And I would suspect a lot of people are like that, especially for men. Men tend to be more aggressive. They tend to be more risk-taking, I think, in general speaking, than women. Not always true, of course, but I think generally speaking. And so as far as living a life, as far as doing things, as far as, being out there in the world, men seem to be a little bit more fearless in that regard. But when it comes to emotions, man, we are terrible, weak. Well, I won't say weak. We haven't been taught how to share our emotions in a good, healthy way. So consequently, that is where the fear really hits us. That's just my perspective. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's how it seems to me.
So in walking through that part of it about emotions, and I've often said that it was a million miles from my head to my heart, because I didn't think I could deal with emotions. Anytime I saw emotions, I saw them as bad, because I didn't know how to do it. So what I did was I was the ultimate stuffer. So I would push it. I would just push it right down. So about in my mid 40s, all of a sudden, the top came off the garbage compactor, and all these emotions started coming up. And I didn't know, and I'm trying to grab them, trying to put them back in. And I didn't know how to deal with any of the things that were coming up. I had never practiced voicing my emotions. I'd never been able to speak them truly to my wife, to my family, to my friends, and I was just utterly overwhelmed with all of these emotions popping up. And there was such fear in me of I'm inadequate. I can't deal with these emotions, and I just need to put them back in the bottle. I don't want to deal with them anymore. And that was the beginning in my mid-40s of the transition of finding out how to deal with those emotions, how to be able to not be afraid, not be overwhelmed. We talk about, and many times I talk about the monsters in the closet, right? You wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and the monsters in the closet come out, and they sit at the end of your bed and they fill the room. Mm-hmm. And I've talked to people about how to deal with those emotions, how to deal with those fears. And it is looking them in the eye. And if they fill the room and they overwhelm you, all you want to do is throw your covers over your head, right? And hope they go away. Well,
the problem is they're in the bed too.
They're in the bed with you. So being able to look at them truly, look at them in the eye, and all of a sudden they get smaller and smaller and smaller. And instead of filling the room, they can fit in the palm of your hand. Now, if something this big, it's much easier to deal with. And for me, that characterized how I saw fear and how I was able to manage those fear of emotions, is be able to look at them, to deal with them, to see them for what they truly were, and that they weren't going to destroy me. And I learned later on in life, emotions are there to protect you as well. Right. They are there to protect you. And so looking at fear in a much different way enabled me to be able to deal with all the emotions that came up. And I was able to connect with other people and talk about them, and know that when you're in a safe space, of course, that when you can open up and share that, all of a sudden they get smaller and smaller still, and you're able to manage them. And you realize that they're just not so big that you can't deal with them, that they're just a part of life.
Yeah, that's a really, really good metaphor for it. I like that. The monsters in the bedroom that are so big, they fill the room, and then they just become small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. That's beautiful. And we're talking about specifically fear in that case. I've come to the belief that there's really only 4 primary emotions. Pretty much everything else that we use in our language is a variation. It's kind of like colors. Colors, we have, well, depending on which model you use, you have the, the red, green, and blue colors, or you have, cyan, magenta, I can't remember the other 2, yellow and black, is it? Anyway, you have those colors, and any other color you choose to name can be made from a combination of those primary colors. Well, the same is true of emotion. We have many, many, many words for emotions. I imagine we have as many words for emotions as we do for colors, maybe more, I don't know. But the problem is, when we do that, we're not really, we give for example, the word frustration. What is frustration? What is that? To me, there's more to it than just emotional energy. There's judgment energy mixed in with that. So there's all the thoughts, that I have about something. I have this belief, I'm not getting what I want. Something is blocking me from getting what I want. So I feel anger. And somehow those 2 together, I call that frustration, right? Well, that's what I have learned. We have feelings, and feelings are actually combinations of emotion, sensation, physical sensation in the body, and the thoughts that are going on in your head. And if you look at any feeling, you'll find those those three elements. So, but what is the emotional energy of each of these feelings? So, for example, people talk about shame being an emotion. No, it's not an emotion. It's a feeling, for sure. But it's not an emotion. If you think about shame, shame is some kind of an emotion, and we'll get to the emotion in a second. But it's a story that I'm no good, I'm bad, people hate me, I'm evil. You know, that's the basic message that I'm telling myself. And because of that, I feel what? In emotional sense. I feel anger. I feel sadness. I feel fear. You know, those emotional energies come into play when I'm experiencing shame. And the same is true of guilt. The only difference about guilt is I feel guilty about something I've done, not about who I am. Right? But it's still judgment. That's what it is that makes up that energy. So what I have learned for myself is there's really only 4 primary emotions. And we've already touched on 3 of them. And one of them is fear. One of them is anger. One of them is sadness. And the last one is joy. Now, it's interesting that joy only gets one part of the 4. But what happens if you mix like joy and fear together? You ever had that experience? Think about,
Yes.
I think about something like a roller coaster. I'm going on this roller coaster. I know it's going to be so fun. I'm going to have so much fun, and I'm terrified. So joy and fear seem to come together to give me that sense of excitement, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the other ones can come together in a variety of ways as well. So a really good exercise, I find, is when I do meditation of some kind, and I notice what am I feeling in my body? What are the sensations that I have? And where is it located? And then I ask myself, and what is the emotional energy I'm feeling there? Is it joy? Is it fear? Is it sadness? Is it anger? Which is it? Which one is the strongest? I try and put it that way. Rather than say it's just anger. There might be some anger and fear together or something, but I'll just say, yeah, the anger seems to be the strongest one in that place. And then I ask myself, what are the thoughts, the stories and stuff that I'm feeling about that? And I'll just say, yeah, the message that I'm getting is I'm not good enough. The message I'm getting is I need to do more in this regard. That's the message I'm getting. And so if we could learn to just take the time, and of course, everybody's busy. I don't have the time, I don't have the time. That's the story you're telling yourself. You really do have the time if you want to. But if you do that, you can learn how to distinguish one emotional energy from another. You can learn to really pinpoint the sensations that you're feeling. And you can also begin to notice without judgment the thoughts that you're having about a particular topic, whatever it might be. I'll tell you something, that has been one of the best tools I have ever learned to help me stay calm, cool, and centered in my life. I'm not going to tell you that fear doesn't come up and I don't, get off kilter or start doing stupid things. Certainly I do. I still have an ego mind. I'm still living in this physical world. And no matter how much work I do, I suspect that ego mind's always going to be around. It's just a question of how much control I'm going to give my ego mind.
So fear, and it's when you listed the 4, you say joy, and it's the only real positive kind of emotion that we're talking about. But I think fear we use it in a positive way.
Yeah. All of them
February.
can be positive, by the way.
Absolutely.
It's just a question of perspective.
Yep. So in February, I'm getting ready for bed, and I have this incredible pain in my chest.
Right.
And it's getting worse. It's getting worse. And I'm talking about fear, and it was momentary. I was home. I was close to medical treatment. I was an hour and a half from the time I called the ambulance till I was getting a stent put in my heart. And that fear made me say, no, I'm not going to just sit here and take this. I'm going to call 911. So it was a positive in that it happened very quickly. It get it resolved very quickly. I'm thankfully in very good health. Still going to cardiac rehab. But it's that little bit of fear of respect for the heart that I have
Right.
now, that it's taught me as I walk through this life to be able to make sure that I make decisions based on, I don't ever want to go through that again. So
Right.
I'm going to eat a little bit better. I'm not going to, drink alcohol. I'm not going to do all of these things. I'm going to cut down on my caffeine, all of those things. And it's just that little bit of fear. And because I had the experience. Now, if I hadn't had the experience and I hadn't felt that, oh shit, emotion, well, maybe I would make different decisions about what to do and how to do it. So fear can be very positive, I find, in the four emotions for me.
Of course. Yeah,
And
what I think you're describing is that fear's tendency to alert us to dangers and to keep us safe.
Yep.
Help us to protect ourselves.
Yeah. But when it's when it's lived in fear of everything, and we see it to the extreme where people are agoraphobic, or it can be so limiting if it becomes too much.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think, see, now that's a really, really good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because this is a case of, I have an ego mind that is so loud, it is telling me that everything I do is going to cause me death and destruction. And therefore, I do nothing. I have this tiny little bubble that I sit in, my comfort zone, and I dare not venture outside that bubble, because the demons are going to get me. The gremlins are going to get me, That's what happens when we allow our ego mind to get out of control and reach the point where everything is a danger. Everything is a danger. Even though the reality is about 99% of the stuff is not a danger. I mean, how often are you really faced with a tiger screaming through your house about to eat you? Or how often do you really have to worry about an airplane crashing into your house? I mean, let's get real. Those things just simply don't happen. Well, I mean, they do happen. It's not a zero possibility, but it is very close to zero, And so we allow ourselves to get caught up in our ego minds, and then the ego mind just takes complete control, and we have no freedom whatsoever in our lives. And so really it's a question of, is this how I want to live? Well, if you want to live that way, I guess, okay, good for you. You've accomplished something that you set out to accomplish. If that's what you want, you've got it. But if you're getting tired of it, and if you really want to be able to express the truth of who you really are, you have to do something to reduce the impact of your ego mind, and realize that those fears are mostly completely imaginary.
It's funny. We both dealt with people that come to us who say, "I'm not content with where I am. I'm stuck. I can't get out of this.
Yeah.
Where I am. I'm just stuck. I don't know how to." And the funniest thing, you put the three components together, is that they are not generally in their body. When I've asked them, when you have this emotion, where do you feel it? What do you mean? Well, it resides in your body somewhere. Where is it? And so I walk them through, okay, think about something that really made you angry. Okay. And then where is it in your body? Where do you feel it? Oh my God, it's right here in my chest. And I don't know what to, okay. You get people back in their body, and it's those three components that they become aware of it. Now, all of a sudden, those fears take on a different perspective. They take on a different realm. And then when where does that come from? It's like thunder and lightning, right? As kids, we're afraid of the thunder, the sound, because we can't kind of wrap our head around something that is so enormous and so loud and is going to get us. Well, people do get struck by lightning, but most likely we're not going to, sitting in our house. And so it's that irrational fear that we've carried and we haven't resolved from when we were children.
Right.
And so a lot of times you can bring somebody to the point where they know lightning is not going to get them. And that fear of that sound is not going to create that same sensation. Right. And so walking out in a rainstorm, they don't have that fear anymore. And so it's interesting how once you bring somebody back into themselves, into their body, into who they really are, they're able to express that. As you always put it, they express themselves fully in their authentic self.
Yeah.
And they're able to walk beyond the fear. Right.
I think that's a great metaphor. Again, the idea of getting struck by lightning. I've done exercises with people where I ask them, I say, okay, so what is your greatest fear? And maybe that would be the one that comes up. I'm afraid of getting hit by lightning. That's why I don't go out. Okay. You're afraid of getting hit by lightning. Is that you got a dog there?
Neighbor's dog. Sorry about that.
No problem. Anyway, so I ask, what's your greatest fear? And I get told my greatest fear is getting hit by lightning. Okay, thank you. And so now let's suppose for a moment that you do get hit by lightning. What are you really afraid of that you haven't yet articulated? Well, I'm going to die. Okay, you're afraid that you're going to die. And what happens if you die? What are you afraid of then? I'm afraid that it's going to be all over, that I will cease to exist. So, I mean, you're going to get all kinds of different answers, but these are just some examples. Ultimately, I think everyone's deepest fear ultimately boils down to a cessation of existence. People are the most afraid that I am simply going to vaporize, disappear, and I'll be completely forgotten, and that's it. And I'm going to die alone on top of that. I will be all alone. There will be nothing. So when you get right down to it, that's a pretty good, significant fear, right?
Yep.
And so there is nothing I can tell people to take away that fear. All I can do is get them to look at it and say, how likely is that? How likely is that? Knowing what you know about yourself and about all the other people that are here on this planet, what can you say to yourself? And how can you stand up into your warrior energy and face that fear and put it right on the end of your sword? How can you do that? And that's kind of what I do. I get people to, reconnect to their warrior energy, that powerful part of themselves that exists deep within all of us. Because when you have that energy, you can face any fear at all. And so if I cease to exist, well, then I won't even be aware of it, will I? I won't know that I've ceased to exist because there will be nothing to be aware of. And there will be no awareness to be aware of it. So, I mean, it seems like a pointless fear to me.
And then we bring in about death and having my parents. Okay, my mom went to church every day of her life, and not every day, every week of her life. She was dedicated. In her 80s, her church had diminished to 7 people, yet she showed up every week because it was her church.
Right.
My dad always said, do with me what you want. There's nothing there. My mom went to church but she was scared to death of the end and would never talk about it. And it was just something that just, for someone who was that religious, was always perplexing to me. So that ties into a lot of other things, but it's a fear of not being anymore. And I think you and I come to the same conclusion that while we're here, damn it, we're going to make as much noise as we possibly can. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to make sure that we make as many connections as we can. We're going to trumpet it as loud as we can, as long as we can. Okay. Fear of public speaking. So the number one fear that most people have is fear of public speaking in front of people. You and I do this on a regular basis, and not very conscious of that fear anymore. But realizing that when we speak, and we speak from the heart, and we speak our truth, people can say, well, you're wrong. Well, okay, from your perspective, I am, but I'm just voicing who I am. And
Right.
that fear of being yourself is no longer there. And when you give people voice, and I truly think that to get beyond and understand your emotions, to understand all of it, to be able to give people their voice and to be able to be heard, we see this time and time again, is the greatest gift, because then they realize, oh, I'm not the only one that thinks this way. I'm not the only one that's gone through this. I'm not alone. There are other people that have done this. One of the reasons I write, and you've done this also many, many times, is to share that experience and let people know other people have the same thoughts you do. Other people
Right.
have the same feelings you do. Other people have been through very similar things that you, and you can make it out on the other side. And it will resolve itself, and things can get better. And just giving that faith and hope and understanding to people makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up public speaking. Yeah, I've never understood why that was listed as the number one fear that most people have. Uh, I'll put it to you this way. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I have not met a single person in my lifetime ever who didn't want to tell me something about him or herself.
Right.
Didn't want to share with me some kind of experience of what had gone on in his or her life. I have not met a person like that yet. At least not a person who is capable of, speaking and of, articulating and communicating. So I think that the idea of fear of public speaking is complete bullshit. I think what people are really afraid of is getting up on stage and sharing from their heart and then being judged by the people in the audience. It's the judgment part that scares them, not the speaking part. They'll be great at that. And so one of the things that I've always told people, and I said, okay, next time you see someone like me or Scott or anybody else up on stage talking, just notice how much you're judging us. And it doesn't have to be us, by the way. It could be anybody. Even someone who doesn't necessarily have a lot of experience speaking in public. It could be anyone. Just notice how much you're judging that person. And I will bet my bottom dollar that you're not really judging them at all. You're sitting there listening to what the other person has to say. Maybe you're resonating. You might have a scowl on your face. You might have, who knows? I don't know. I cannot judge what you're thinking just because you're sitting there with your arms crossed or something like that. You may be totally enjoying my speech and looking at me with this scowl on your face. I don't know. It could be. But my point is, when people are up on stage, most of the audience are not spending their time judging that person. In fact, forget about being on stage. Most people are too busy with their own lives to judge you at all. If you're even in their thoughts.
Yep.
So why are we so afraid of being judged by other people? The fact of the matter is, we do our own judging. We judge ourselves enough for everyone.
Yep. Yeah, we absolutely do. When I've talked to people about public speaking, about talking in front of other people, I said, I always equate it with, you're just having a conversation, a one-on-one conversation, just like you and I are having right now, except other people are listening. And so what that brings is, you have to moderate your speech a little bit. You can't just yell fire in a crowded theater, right? So you have to just be aware of who's listening in. It's like the old party lines. Oh, I'm showing my age. I'm sorry. Um, somebody was or being on a three-way call or being on any of these where other people are listening, that you are just having a one-on-one conversation. So the fear, and we have those every day, and so the fear diminishes when you think of things in that perspective. So
Right.
I really think that fear can be overcome by the change of perspective about how we see things. When I'm afraid of something, um, my granddaughter, I brought my grandson and granddaughter up, and we went into where a tube where you were, it was like you were parachuting, right? Jumping out of an
Oh,
airplane, and we went through that, and we brought them,
oh,
and they both
indoor skydiving.
indoor skydiving. There you go. And so my granddaughter's 13 at the time, and she said, "Oh my God, can we jump out of a plane now?" And I was like, "Okay, look it up." She says, "Nope, I have to be 18." I said, "What about bungee jumping?" Nope, I got to be 18. I said, "What about zip lining?" "Yep, I can do it if I'm over 12." I said, "Okay, we did it." So we found the longest zip line in the country, and it happened to be in Massachusetts, of all places. So she and I drove out, and I always look at things like this. And David, I know you've done incredible things in your life. You were a jet pilot, so you've done things that I haven't even thought of. But whenever I look at something, and whether it's a roller coaster or something that is going to turn me upside down and around, I look at how many people are doing it. I'm saying, wait a minute, if these hundreds of people in front of me are doing this, it can't be all that bad, right? So this is a mile. It was a mile long zip line, mile long, and you get
Wow,
up to about 60, 65 miles an hour. So I'm like,
that's
yeah, let's
awesome.
do this, and that's awesome. And
Yeah.
so she gets on, and boom, she's gone. And I pull about 3/4 of the way, and I'm going about 3/4 speed. And I already know physics. I'm a lot bigger than she is. I pull it down all the way, and I go zipping by her. And she told me she's going to beat me. I'm going to beat you to the end. And so we're getting to the close. And so I start slowing down as I get close to the end. All of a sudden, she comes zipping by, full force, slam. She pushes that spring at the end of it all the way to the end. And she just looks at me and says, "Beat you." So it was a great. This was a birthday present for her. So
Yeah.
it was a great thing about fear, about overcoming it. And the funny thing is, she said, "Can we do it again?" I said, "Absolutely." She said, "But I'm sorry." I said, "For what?" She said, "The entire way down, I was swearing my head off. I hope you didn't hear me." But she loved it because it was the fear, and it
Yeah.
brought that point you said about where fear and joy come together is in doing that. And by the
Yeah,
way,
right.
because of that, I have when I turn 70, I have and she turns 18. I have an appointment to jump out of an airplane on the after her 18th birthday.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, good for you. Yeah, that's great. I mean, and so really what we're talking about here is letting the fear kind of motivate you to do something that you might not otherwise have done, and to maybe step out of your comfort zone. Because here's one of the things that I know about comfort zone. If I stay in my comfort zone, soon enough it's going to become more like a coffin, because
Ooh,
I'm just not allowing myself to grow. And growth requires expansion, right? So your comfort zone, it may be a circle, it may be whatever shape it is, but as you punch through on one part of the comfort zone, you increase the boundary level of that thing. That's called growth. You ever notice that? And then maybe you say, "Oh, that's good. I felt good about that one. Let me try this one over here." And so I'll try something different and grow that way. And just keep doing that. Just keep punching through this comfort zone. All you got to do is step one step out. That's it. One step. That's all it takes. It doesn't have to be a mile outside the comfort zone. That's kind of crazy. Now you're putting yourself possibly into the death zone, You don't have to be an extreme cyclist to live outside your comfort zone, or an extreme anything. You know, I don't think those people who are doing that extreme sports started off extreme. I think they just kind of gradually worked their way up. We didn't see all the steps in between to get them where they are now. And so we marvel at some of the things that they do, right? But it's really, I was watching a video the other day about a guy who wanted to have the longest, it was a Red Bull sponsored event. He wanted the longest ski jump. And so they couldn't use regular ski jumps, you know, because he couldn't get the kind of distance he wanted. He was looking for 300 meters. 300 meters, that's 1,000 yards airborne. And traveling at, I don't know, 60 or 70 miles an hour or whatever. It might be higher than that. So anyway, they built a special ramp for him to go down. And it took him about 10 or 15 tries before he finally hit it just right. But I'm thinking every one of those 15 tries could have been a crash. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't, because he had built up his skill to the level that he knew he could do it. And he hit 291 meters. It's a world record. Yeah, he didn't quite make the 300 meter mark. I'm sure he's going to get to it later. But my point is, we all have the ability to expand our comfort zones. Okay? Don't judge your comfort zone with somebody else's. Just judge it with yourself. Is my comfort zone bigger today than it was yesterday? That's all that matters. And if you can do that.
I also talk about tiny steps. It's weight. Think about weight loss. All right. If you drop weight really quickly, what happens? Comes right back, right? But if you lose your weight a little bit at a time, and it stays off that way. And people, when they want to change, I always talk about the everyday rituals to change that baby step.
Right.
Broader, a little bit broader, a little bit broader. If you do it slowly, it becomes a part of you. If it becomes a part of you, you're not going to, you can't regress. You don't, because you've expanded yourself. You've expanded who you are, what you are. And in that, you can't stay in that comfort zone anymore. That box gets really tight when you start expanding, and it's not. So you need to expand your comfort zone when you do that. And all of a sudden, the world gets a little bit bigger. When your world gets bigger, your opportunities, the connections, everything else gets bigger. And that's a simple way of overcoming the fear of getting too big but just doing it slowly, effectively every single day.
You know, I think that there's another lesson to be learned here, and that is that the comfort zone exists. It's part of it's related to the ego mind. Okay? As you do more and more work to connect deeper and deeper with the truth of who you really are, you become less and less attached to your ego mind, and therefore less and less attached to your comfort zone. Sooner or later, you'll reach a point, if you continue this kind of work long enough, you'll reach a point where there is no comfort zone anymore. You are living in complete openness and expansiveness. Now, I haven't achieved that yet, but I believe it's there to be achieved. I would not doubt that some people have achieved it. And I can't imagine, because I haven't experienced it yet, other than in my imagination, I'm not sure what it would be like to be completely free of all boundaries. What would that mean? And yet, it kind of scares me. But it's one of those fears that helps me to move toward it, not move away from it. You know? I wanted to just say something. We had talked about this during our conversation, and we haven't brought it up yet, but I wanted to talk about what happens when we have fears that we keep suppressing. We keep pushing them into the background. Why didn't you take a little stab at that?
Well, having carried that bag of tricks around with me for many years, all those fears, it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And if you want to talk about shadow work, if you want to talk about a buddy of mine was walking in it, and I just laughed a little bit, and I said, "You sound like your butt is scraping on the ground with all the things that you're bringing with you, all those emotional baggage, right? All
Right.
those things that you have not dealt with." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm just so down." And so we sat and we talked, and he laughed, and by the end of it, his bag was a little bit lighter, and I just said, "How does it feel now?" And he says, "Not so bad." I said, "Try offloading a lot of that."
Right.
And those are the things that can grow and fester, and you can feed it, and it gets heavier and heavier. And that that bag that we carry with all those dark parts of ourselves just doesn't necessarily have to be there.
That's right.
Why? It doesn't. Because when we look at it, much like the monsters in the closet, right? When you look at those fears that you're not carrying around anymore, that are dealt with, some of those are fears we've had since we were 2, 3, 4 years old. Some we just kind of feel we were born with because our parents always held them to be true. And when we look at them, they diminish. They don't go away. They're a part of us, but they are manageable, and they don't carry the weight. And that weight that they put on ourselves, the weight that they put on our minds, on our character, on our personality. And therein, I think what you were saying, we truly feel free when those fears are not there, when they don't take over, when they aren't so dark and heavy and scary, that we really they're just a part of us. And we don't have that judgment about them anymore, that they are
Right.
bad. They're just a part of us. They've made us who we are. I accept it, and given it compassion, given it understanding, given it perspective, changes the weight that we're carrying.
Right. And I think another piece that's really important, we've already talked about the fact that certain fears can actually be gifts in disguise. We didn't necessarily use those words, but here's something you could ask yourself when you identify a particular element in your bag. When you're taking it out, just examining it, and you can say, okay, how have you served me in my life? What have you done for my life? And just wait and see what kind of an answer you get. And this answer is going to be coming from that part of you that was afraid for whatever reason, and will say something along the lines of, well, I just needed to keep myself safe. I needed to protect myself against this because I believed this other thing was going to happen. And then when you hear that, when you understand that, you can say, wow, I'm so glad you did that. You protected yourself. You made yourself safe. Thank you for doing that, because otherwise you might not be here now. And I know that you're here to keep me protected. So you can then integrate that part back into yourself from a place of love and compassion, and say, I'm an adult now. I have these adult powers that I didn't have when I was your age, right? And you can say, now that I know these things, I know how to deal with that sort of stuff going forward. So I don't need to rely on this fear anymore to protect me. That's a beautiful way of reframing it for yourself, because you can then say, yeah, thank you for doing what you did, and bring that into your heart. Love it with all the love you can muster and all the gratitude you can bring to it, and just say thank you. Thank you is powerful words.
Gratitude was what brought me out of when I was feeling all that overwhelm. Gratitude is what saved my life, really.
Right.
Being able to be grateful for at that moment in my life, someone said, give me 3 things you're grateful for, and I couldn't name one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when somebody said that to me, I could go on for a couple hundred things that I'm grateful for. And it's just
Right.
perspective. And what you were talking about was healing your inner child. All of those things that we never dealt with or never really observed, but being able to bring that out and comforting that inner child with that fear and that sensation that we had, and being able to give it compassion and love and acknowledging it, and all of a sudden
Right.
it just eases. And that's an amazing aspect and an amazing tool that people can use.
Yeah, right. Beautiful. Well, Scott, look at that. It's already an hour in, and we have talked about a lot of good stuff here on the mystery of fear. What final words would you like to say before I close us out?
For those of you listening, and just know that fear is not always about being afraid. Fear is about safety. And it's okay. It is a positive. And if we look at it as positive, it loses a lot of its force.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. Well said. So, friends, I want to just say thank you for being here. Thank you for watching the recording. I hope that we have helped to maybe demystify some of the mystery of fear here for you in our conversation. And I want to thank you for being here. And I just want to remind you that you have the recordings of this and every other episode on my website at MagnifEssence.com. I hope you'll check that out. And I guess before I close, I just want to remind you all of my life mastery mantra. I want you to share this and practice it and take it into your life and as a regular practice. It's 3 simple sentences. You can just say them and just say thankful. Stay thankful. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. And so it is. So thank you all for being here. I wish you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey, and I'll see you next time on MagnifEssence in Motion. Bye-bye for now.